Let's first take a look at the emergence and the composition of a new ruling class in Koryo, in late Koryo, and the reason for its appearance. The reason for its appearance is really twofold, and the first reason has to do with the emergence, that would be a euphemism, the conquest of the Mongol Empire in the 12th century, which, as I mentioned before, is the largest land empire ever conquered. And it came to include Koryo, although that process was certainly not an easy process. Let me go into some detail to give you an idea of how Koryo came to be part of the Mongol Empire and how it tried to resist that both for and after its incorporation into the empire. Now, if you look here at this map of the Mongol Empire, you'll see that Koryo is not part of the Mongol Empire, and in fact, there is an argument to be made for excluding Koryo from being part of the empire because it did have a certain special status that other parts of the empire did not have. Having said that, given the intervention that Mongols habitually undertook in Koryo politics, given the fact that Koryo in terms of economy was really exploited by the Mongol Empire, given the fact that the rulers were now forced, the male rulers were now forced to marry Mongolian princesses, and there's more. I think it's fair to say Koryo was part of the Mongol Empire, even though it was less part of the Mongol Empire than perhaps other conquered territories. But in the end, it comes down to the important political decisions being made not in Koryo, not in Kaegyong, but in Kanbalik or in Dadu, nowadays Beijing. Now, let's start with a very short overview of Koryo-Mongol relations, because there's a long history to the absorption of Koryo into the Mongol Empire. And if you just look at this list, and it starts with the first Mongol envoy to Koryo, and their subsequent death in an ambush by Koryoans, that the relations start off, and not very auspiciously. It would take the Mongols 6 years to respond to the murder of their envoy, or their embassy, but they did respond, and they responded by invading Koryo. And they invaded Koryo, depending how you count, 6 to 9 times, from 1231 to 1257. There was not constant warfare on the peninsula, but there was warfare, and it was at times gruesome warfare, although it was mainly the northern part of the peninsula that was hit by warfare. The southern part was relatively safe from the Mongol armies. And when I say Mongol army, I'm not just talking about ethnically Mongol armies, the original armies of Genghis Khan, who by this time had been succeeded by one of his sons, but armies under the command of Mongol commanders. So part of them were Jurchen, part of them were Khitan, part of them were Chinese, and at a certain moment also part of them were Koryoans who went over to the Mongols. Now this occasioned all kinds of changes within Koryo itself. In 1232, so right after the first invasion, the capital moved to Kangdo, which was the new name of the capital, but now it was rebuilt on an island near the coast, quite close to what is nowadays Seoul, Kangwado. Why was the capital moved there? Well, because it was quite clear to the rulers of Koryo that the Mongols were not interested in talking to them. And the rulers of Koryo, make no mistake, did not consist of the aristocracy and the king, but it consisted of the military rulers who had taken over the administration of the country. It really staged a coup d'etat in 1170. And from 1195 onwards, it was the House of Chue, so the Chue clan, who really ruled Koryo. But they were not the kings of Koryo. They kept the king in place. They respected him ideologically, but not politically. But did this mean that the Mongols refused to talk to anybody but the king or the representatives of the king. So for the military rulers, it was really simple. They couldn't negotiate with the Mongols, so they moved the capital to Kangwado. Why Kangwado? Because it's an island. It's slightly more difficult to invade for the Mongols, who did not at that moment have too much of a navy. And the other thing is that much of Kodio's taxes in kind, so grain and rice and everything, were not transported over land but over sea and were gathered at Kangwado. So it was also a place where they would have full disposal over the taxes levied over Kodio farmers and others. 1258, the House of Choi, the Choi clan, is removed from power. The fourth generation is killed. Then there is a very complicated political situation ensues, and I will just go through it very quickly. The king dies, King Kojong dies, and his son takes over, King Wonjong. And when he dies, when his father dies, he's still a crown prince, is visiting Kublai Khan. And this creates a better relationship that leads in 1270 to the formal submission of Kodio to Kublai Khan and the formal absorption of Kodio into the Mongol Empire. So in that sense, Kodio was not really conquered because military resistance was still going strong, which is also shown by the fact that in the same year that the king and the people supporting the king submitted to Kublai and returned to the capital in Kaegyong, where they were unprotected against Mongol invasions. In the same year, the Samgyeopsal, the three extraordinary armies or patrols, rebelled, and they basically founded their own state. Well, it took 3 years for the Mongols, for the combined forces of Kodio, the royal forces of Kodio, and the Mongols to pacify this rebellion, but in the end it would. And in 1273, the entire country is, for the first time since the invasions that started in 1231, again at peace. Well, to a certain extent, because now Kodio was part of the Mongol Empire. And again, it was not fully part of the empire like some of the other places that were conquered by the Mongols, but still, it was now part of a much bigger entity, and it now had to change to a radically changed world. And this is where the need for a new ruling class comes in. Part of the ruling class had chosen to fight against the royal armies and against the Mongols, and they lost their position. Others just waited to see who would win, and some had made common cause with the Mongols quite early. And you can imagine that these were part of the new elite, the people who made the decisions, the people who would rule the country henceforth, with strong input from Mongols who stationed their own administrators in Kodio, the so-called Darugachi. And of course there was the Kublai Khan's plan to invade Japan, which meant that he needed to do so from Korea. It's closest, if you want to invade Japan from Northeast Asia, the best place to do that from is Korea. Kodio, in this case, and the Mongols also needed Kodio's shipbuilding facilities and know-how in order to transport the fleet. So this meant a very clear and almost lethal exploitation and subordination to the demands of empire of the Kodio economy. Now, in order to make everything happen, in order to rule the country, and in order for Kodioans to keep some kind of grip on their country, especially for the politically influential class, they needed to be able to work with the Mongols. They needed to be able to talk to the Mongols. They needed to be able to understand what the decision-making process in the Mongol capital, or the Yuan capital of Dadu was. These were not skills that Kodio aristocrats or Kodio bureaucrats necessarily always had. Later generations, they would change. They would be fluent in Chinese, they would learn Mongol, they would have Mongol names, but in the beginning, this was certainly not the case. So what Kodio needed was an influx of other people, people who could do this, who could serve as intermediaries between Koryo and the Yuan, who were fluent in Chinese, who were fluent in Mongol language, but also in culture, culturally fluent, and who could adapt to Koryo. So this is the moment when relatively large influx of both Mongol administrators and bureaucrats and Western Asian administrators were accepted into the Koryo ruling class, mainly as diplomatic go-betweens, but also as military commanders, because even if there was now peace, there were always fights to fight and rebellions to crush. Now, Koryo aristocrats are not well known because they easily let other people enter their elite. They usually didn't. And when slaves, emancipated slaves that did this, the reaction had not been very good. But in this case, there doesn't seem to have been any significant kind of resistance. Why? Well, I think there are two reasons. One, the people who entered the ruling class were by necessity, at least their number was by necessity small, because the ruling class is small. And the other reason is because these new arrivals did not challenge the basic social status system. They accepted it and they became part of it. So it was easier to understand, to accept that, well, the world had changed and Koryo needed to change along with it. What also played a part of, and this is, I guess, the overarching theme of this entire lecture series, is the fact that Koryo was now part of a larger, cosmopolitan, and this is important, multi-ethnic imperial order. So foreigners, Central Asians mainly, Western Asians and Mongols may have entered the Koryo ruling class at the same time, or slightly later. Koryoans, such as Lee Tae-hyun is probably the most important, the most well-known example, entered the ruling class in the imperial capital in Dadu. So this is not a one-way street, it's a two-way street. But it tells you how different the world was, that this was a possibility. That for Koryo officials, it was no longer obvious that they would have a career in Koryo. They could now have a career in Dadu. And foreign officials could have a career in Koryo. And this was something which was completely different from before. So the acceptance into the ruling class was not much of a problem. And this is well reflected in, for example, poetry from this period. And what you see now on screen is a famous poem, or at least a poem by a famous poet, Igok, and scholar official, who expresses a sentiment that you can see in more poems and writings of this period. And I'll read it to give you that notion, to let you know how important this is. The nearer to the south of the river you get, the newer everything is. And this is the river that traditionally divided Koryo from the rest of the continent. So this is the Amnokang, the Yalu River. Vestiges of the 6 dynasties no longer possess their authenticity. In other words, the Chinese past, the traditional past is gone. Now that the sacred Yuan have unified the world, the past is no more. How more explicit do you want him to be? There is no more past. We are now unified, we are different, this is new. This is a brand new world. I laugh at those people from the past, each clinging to their own part of the world. You're no longer just a Koryoan. You may have been born there, and that may be your first language. You are also an imperial citizen. And this is why it became possible for Western Asians, Central Asians, Mongols to enter the Koryo ruling class. And often they entered the Koryo ruling class as part of retinues of, for example, the Koryo, the brides, the wives, the consorts of the Koryo kings, who were Mongol princesses. They brought their own retinues, and it is these people who become the intermediaries between the Yuan capital, where they came from, and the new place where their mistress now is queen. So it's often these people without also, and this also helped their acceptance, who didn't have their own influential family background. They may have been slaves, they may have been low-born, didn't matter in the Mongol Empire at this moment, as long as you had skills, and skills they apparently had. So they could be accepted because they formed no threat, they had skills, and they came in small numbers, and the background is basically cosmopolitan empire. So ethnicity, not much of a factor here, Politics, on the other hand, definitely very big factor. This is all about politics. I'll not go into it, but I'll just ask you to note that. And this tells you something about late Koryo. The fact that within the Mongol Empire it may have occupied a special position, but it also was open to accepting successful Mongols, Western Asians, Central Asians. And the thinking in bloodline and lineages, the notion on racial exclusivity and everything, the patrilineal descent and the importance attached to that, that's something that only came important in the Joseon dynasty and much later, and really didn't play any kind of role in the Joseon, in the Koryo period, in the late Koryo period. So, summarizing the keywords for the Mongol invasions, that's where it started. The Mongol Empire, because Koryo was absorbed into the empire. Then there is the struggle to find a place within the empire or to remain outside it. And Koryo was absorbed into the empire despite moving the capital to Kangwado and despite the rebellion of the Sambocho. After that, you see that Koryo becomes part of a much more cosmopolitan world, which means, among other things, that Mongols, Uyghurs, Central Asians, Western Asians enter Koryo and become successful bureaucrats. And it also means that Koryoans go to the capital and become successful bureaucrats there. So much more than before, there's social mobility for the people coming in from the outside. For the people within Koryo, didn't really change. Social status and the notions behind it stay as they were, even though there's a new cosmopolitan world. And ethnicity, your own ethnic background, didn't really count. Well, it did count to the extent that it may have given you some kind of advantage in as to languages that you would speak or cultures you would be familiar with and could, with familiarity and with fluency, act in. But that's it. Ethnicity is just no thing. It becomes much more important later on. And this part of Koryo history is probably as unimportant as it has ever been or ever would be. And with that, I'd like to end the first part of this lecture.
Thank you.